Hello, I'm Matthew Goodwin-Freeman, and welcome to VoteWatch's Deep Dive Discussions. With me tonight is James Esses. Not only is he founder of Just Therapy, a very anti-woke therapy service that I very much recommend, he is the man who took on the wokerati and won. James, lovely to have you. How are you?
Very well. That's, I think, possibly the nicest introduction I've ever had.
Well, we'll clip that up for you, and you can make it your ringtone if you want. Look, James, tell our viewers your story, because you gave me a little snippet there, and I was instantly taken. I think you've done what so many people wish they could do, which is stand up to woke. So please tell us what you've been through.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, a few years ago, I was just this kind of lonely trainee psychotherapist, and I basically felt at some point on the course that I had to speak out because I was concerned about critical race theory. I was particularly concerned about gender ideology, from a therapeutic perspective, seeing children being encouraged to believe they're in the wrong bodies and then put on irreversible puberty blockers, hormones, then going on and having their breasts removed. Obviously didn't sit quite right with me. I felt like it flew in the face of therapeutic ethics. So I spoke out. I set up an account on what was then known as Twitter, began to write a bit, speak a bit, and attracted some attention and some controversy for that, for simply stating biological reality. And I ended up getting kicked off my course, my master's degree, and I spent the next 2-3 years embroiled in litigation, which just a few months ago settled out of court in my favour, which was very good. And essentially, I've kind of developed a bit of a platform off the back of that, and I've, for want of a better term, transitioned into just journalism and writing and trying to uncover ways in which these ideologies have taken over our public institutions.
Well, I'm glad to hear you've transitioned in the right way and not in the woke way. But look, I mean, you are someone who has stood up and said exactly what you feel in a time where many people feel afraid to say it as it is. I mean, there are so many things there that we could be talking about. I mean, how did we get to this point, not only in the UK, but just in the world, where you can be born a boy or be born a girl, but then told throughout your childhood, actually, no, we're going to let you decide. We're going to let you come up with what you think you are at the end of your days as a child. And actually, not even until you get to 18, as soon as you want, as soon as you feel you're unhappy or you don't understand, which actually is a part of growing up, as soon as you think we'll make life-changing decisions like puberty blockers and cutting off children's breasts. It's utterly ridiculous. How do we get here?
I think it's a combination of a desperation to try and be kind and to right the wrongs of the past, and that combined with public shaming and morality policing, I think, has been a kind of toxic combination. Because, undoubtedly wrongs were committed in the past. You look at the race thing, of course, I mean, slavery. And of course, what was going on, particularly in parts of the States as well. There was a need for that civil rights movement. Similarly, with, I'm going to say LGBT, but at the end of the day, people's sexuality. Well, again, particularly in the United Kingdom, we made a lot of mistakes in the past, and people were persecuted, and people came to harm because of their sexuality in a way that wasn't right. The problem is now we've swung too far in the opposite direction. And so, well, we can even see this with the acronym of LGBT, because the T is being tacked on to the end of it. And so people are being led to believe that this is all one cause. And of course, it's anything but. These are completely different things. There's increasing numbers of gay and lesbian people saying, we don't want to be associated with this gender ideology. But because it's tacked on, and now everyone says LGBT or LGBTQI plus exclamation mark, squiggly face, whatever.
Isn't it the alphabeti spaghetti or something?
Completely. Senior less has been added on all the time. So it all gets roped together. And so people think, well, we did have problems with, homophobia, etc. in the past. So now we must make sure that we do the right thing going forward for these other persecuted minorities. So I think that's part of the problem. And then I said, the morality policing and the kind of public shaming as well. I mean, people love to grandstand nowadays. People love to make their even political opponents out to seem like evil people. Gone are the days, it seems, where you could have kind of respectful disagreement over policy or politics. Now it's basically always seen as good versus evil, and I think that's caused a lot of this.
Well, the thing that I always wonder is the women in the heart of this. What the heck has happened to women's rights, and what does this pose to women's rights? I mean, is this what the suffragettes were fighting for all those years ago, for their equal rights to be enshrined, and then suddenly upended by someone who decides tomorrow morning, do you know what? I'm deciding going the other way. Is that what women's rights were all set up for?
But that's the ludicrousness of all of this, because this is so regressive. These people portray themselves as progressive liberals, but it's so utterly regressive, because this is impacting on women's rights, whether it's the use of their spaces, toilets, changing rooms, etc., prisons, whether it's participation and fairness in sport, whether it's simply the identity of what it means to be a woman, and not having your entire identity kind of brought down to nothing but body parts. I mean, when you see some of even NHS guidance, referring to women as, cervix havers and things like that, that's
chest feeding, all that sort of rubbish.
Chest feeding, yeah, correct. It's so utterly regressive, and so it flies in the face of wanting to promote women's rights, and the women's rights campaigners that I engage with. I mean, they essentially say, here's a group of men coming for our rights all over again, and now it's just these men are wearing dresses and saying that they identify as women. So it's so utterly backwards. And I don't. I mean, I've said this before. I don't consider myself a feminist in the way that the term is used these days. I think the term's been twisted a lot, but I fundamentally believe in women's rights and rights to equality, and this ideology has completely undermined all of that.
Well, and there used to be this whole thing of feminism and then feminazism, which was feminism is women need equal rights. Feminazism is women actually need to be superior to men. And what you're seeing at the moment is the talking about feminism has got that harsh attitude of feminazism of actually we've got to be better, then everyone else has to be involved as well. And men are the problem, and men have always been the problem. And just at that point, you can't even have an honest discussion and debate with someone. I mean, I'm going to ask you the question which every politician in the world seems to fail on, which is, what's the definition of a woman to you? What is your definition? Because to me, it's 3 words: adult, female, human. That's it. It's those 3 words.
I've got nothing to add. I mean,
why are we all getting so? Why on earth is society getting so worked up over this? Why are we twisting ourselves in knots over something that should be solved within 3 words? Do you have any idea how long this is going to carry on for? Is this just a phase, or is this now life going forward?
I've said this time and time again. We've become a very narcissistic, self-obsessed world. Technology is partly to blame for that, although not entirely. And so now identity is king, and that's why you see, whether it's after an email signature or on an X tagline, or how people introduce themselves at work before they deliver presentations, they reel off now a whole list of kind of self-identifiers. I would be James Esses, a cis heterosexual white male from immigrant.
He, him. That your pronouns. Correct. Don't forget those, because that annoys everyone.
Well, of course, you have to have the pronouns in there.
I will never have pronouns in my email signature. I tell you that now.
No, neither will I. Although I think last year for April Fool's Day, I did update my ex profile pronouns, which was quite fun.
What were they? Utter legend or something? That's the.
I actually just went for the he him.
Oh dear!
Why not play them their own game? But you've got all these kind of self-identifiers, and people are really obsessed now with identity and kind of who they are in the world. And I think as a result, you lose sight of the bigger picture, which is that there's more to life than how one feels about themselves. And kind of depressing, because everyone spends so much time thinking about themselves that I think people think a lot less about other people these days than they used to. Yeah. I think that's part and parcel of kind of what all this is about, particularly amongst children and teenagers, because they are changing and developing, and when they go through adolescence and puberty, I guess it kind of makes them a bit self-obsessed in a way, because they're literally seeing their entire personalities, bodies changing before their very eyes. But I think we do ourselves a disservice with all of this because there is so much more to human beings, and the complexity of human beings and how unique we all are, than being reduced to signifiers like
Yeah.
my
And
gender is
And
X.
one of the moments that exploded all of this here in the UK was obviously a couple of years ago in Scotland, where Scotland decided to water down their laws and basically bring in self ID, and anyone can ID as what they want. And this was perfectly, it was not only blocked by the UK government, but it was perfectly timed, where there was a case of a rapist self IDing so that they could go to an all female prison. Now,
Yes.
I don't want to be too graphic, but this rapist had a pen of his own and absolutely should not be put into an all-female prison. What on earth is going on? I mean, thank God we had a government at the time that stood up and said, no, this is stupid. We've got to put our kids first. But that's the slippery slope. All it takes is one law, one puberty blocker, and that's it. You cannot reverse the damage of puberty blockers.
Correct, and I was very pleased to see the stance that the Conservative government took at the time and blocking that legislation in Scotland. But then we do have to remember that so much of this happened under the Conservatives' watch. So this is the issue, and in fact, all of the mainstream political parties in the UK have essentially been, in some form or another, kind of hoodwinked over this. I would say, I mean, Reform are a relatively new party, and they've come out kind of all guns blazing against this from the outset. But in terms of the establishment parties, they were all taken by this in one form or another. Unfortunately, we now have legislation that underpins and allows for this. We've got the Gender Recognition Act, which gives more than just the legal ramifications. It sends a message to the public that there is some difference between one's biological and one's legal sex. So, while that exists, I don't see how we can return to any sense of normalcy. But even the Equality Act, again, and having, a protected characteristic of gender reassignment. So we've got different forms of legislation that essentially prop up this ideology. The Labour government now is still talking about putting a ban in place on quote-unquote conversion therapy, which could potentially write the term gender identity into law as well. So, I mean, we have to row back this legislation, but I mean, even with the Conservatives, I couldn't see it happening with them. At the moment, I'd say the only party that seems to be saying they would fully row back on these things is Reform. So we've got a legal issue, we've got the cultural issue, we've got educational issues as well. I mean, I'm still almost on a daily basis being sent materials by concerned teachers or parents of what's going on in their children's schools, and
it's ridiculous.
If children have been indoctrinated from such a young age, I mean, what hope do they have, really?
Can you give us examples? Can you give examples of some of the things that you're sent from concerned teachers that are being taught to kids right now in this country today? Like, what's some examples of things that you've been sent?
I've been sent workbooks which say things like the doctor that took a guess at your sex when you were born, they might have got it wrong. I get sent pride celebrations in school in which children are being encouraged to wave pride flags and do pride bunting. In fact, there was a photo, I published this online a few months ago, at like a pride party in a primary school, and one of the kids is holding up a sign that says, "I can't even think straight." And I said, that's the type of sign that you would see on a stag or a hen do.
Yeah.
Not in a bloody primary school.
That's ridiculous.
There's teachers that are insisting that their young primary school pupils use their gender-neutral pronouns for them and refer to them as MX, MX.
Oh, yes, of course, because that's going to confuse a kid even more. Look, I mean, so school is one place where this has a real-world impact. The other place is sport. We are seeing time and time again female achievements, female records being smashed by men. And I'm happy to say it, by men. We have seen that time and time again. And the problem is that just absolutely breaks the point of having male and female categories. If you as a young girl aspire to have the 100-meter sprint world record or whatever it is, and see a man beat you, it's ridiculous. And that man would have come, 100th, 200th in the men category. I mean, what is going on that we have biological men who transitioned allowed to participate in women's sport? Like, how is that allowed?
But precisely, we saw in the Olympics, obviously, the boxing.
Yes, yeah.
I'm not going to go, I try to inject some nuance in these things. So I'm not going to say that every single man identifying as a woman for the purpose of sports is doing so solely to gain an unfair advantage. Again, for some of these people, they've been indoctrinated, they've been force-fed this ideology. It is a mental health condition. There is a social contagion going on. Some of them probably do feel they just want to be their quote-unquote true selves. But some are doing it for nefarious motives and because it gives them an unfair advantage. Regardless of what the intention is, the outcome is that women are being disenfranchised, women are being robbed of fair competition in sports and athletics, which again is a complete and utter disgrace. But
what should be done about it, though? Like, what should the Olympic Committee actually do about it?
Well, we need to stop this kind of piecemeal approach, because some of the sporting governing bodies in the UK, for example, have come out and actually changed the tune on this and have very much made it now that this horse will remain sex segregated, and that is the sex that you were born as, rather than any kind of legal changes you made along the way. But others haven't. We need a one-size-fits-all approach to this. I mean, I actually think it's going to require... I'd like to see some legislation at this space from the government, essentially, because when you leave it up to these individual sporting bodies, it allows those that are still kind of controlled by ideologues to kind of keep doing what they're doing. And it's not right that women in one sport can be protected over another. Equally, like even... amateur sport is being impacted by this. For example, like the park run and other forms of kind of amateur marathons and running events. Yes, it's not a professional event, but again, these women who are competing, they're doing so often because they want to achieve something. They want to record a particular time. There's still an order of merit at the end of the race, even if they're not necessarily being paid for it. They're not professionally competing. They shouldn't be robbed of that opportunity for fair competition either. Similarly in schools, in the school playground and PE lessons, and school sports teams, again, those children, particularly those girls, should be able to compete in a sex-segregated way, which is fair and reasonable. And I keep being told time and time again that it's unfair because you're preventing trans people from playing sport. No, you're not. You're simply saying to them, you play in the sport of the sex that you are, or alternatively, if you're not happy with that, you can have your own category.
Yeah, bring on the Trans Olympics. All 5 people will watch it. What you talked about, legislation might be needed. Well, can I point us towards the United States of America, where the new Trump administration on day 1 signed an executive order about gender identity, making it clear there are male and there are female. That's it. What do you is that what we need? We need a Trump to spell it out for the world, and then the world listens. I mean, I thought it was a brilliant moment when he said, this is a big one, and signed it there and then.
It was incredible. As I was reading through it, and I was seeing the type of language that myself and colleagues have been using for the last number of years, and see that written there with the presidential seal on it, it's quite incredible, really. I mean, he's kind of blown this whole thing out of the water. Be very interested to see in practice how it turns out.
Yeah. Do you think there's going to be any problems and stumbling blocks, and what would they be?
Well, the problem is some of these issues are dealt with on a state-by-state level, even in terms of certain forms of healthcare, etc. There's a lot that you can do at a federal level, even in terms of kind of essentially robbing institutions and push this narrative of funding, etc. So, there's a lot of good stuff in there. And most importantly, it sets a message and a tone from the very top of the country all the way down that this is what we stand for as a country. But it does have its limitations. But I'm still very jealous of America for having him and willing to actually do this, because he would have known he's going to come in for a lot of flack off the back of that, and he has done from various ideologues. But he's got the kind of courage that, unfortunately, a lot of our politicians don't have over here. But that's precisely what we need. A number of years ago, I actually wrote up with hundreds of other signatories something called the Declaration for Biological Reality, which basically set out what our country needs to do to kind of restore the status quo of common sense in this space. And that includes passing forms of legislation, repealing other forms of legislation, even in terms of the puberty blockers. I was very, very pleased to see that the Labour government put in place this indefinite ban on puberty blockers. And that's what most people in the country took away. They thought, this is great news, we've turned the tide, and that's it. But when you read small print, you see, well, number one, it's not a permanent ban, it's just an indefinite ban to be reviewed in a few years' time. Number two, children who are already on this medication will continue to receive it.
Ridiculous.
And number three, we're going to be planning clinical trials where unlimited numbers of children can partake in them. So,
Brilliant.
you know, I think a lot of it is smoke and mirrors, and I'm really not happy with the way this country is continuing to go on this issue.
Well, one of the things that Trump has up against him is that he will never be cancelled. I mean, he's just made the greatest comeback of all time when it comes to presidential elections. Cancel culture is still a humongous thing in British society and still a thing around the world. You yourself faced the cancel culture with what you've been through with obviously your jobs and stuff. I mean, do you think that the cancel culture is a part of this? People are scared to speak out to protect our kids for fear that they're going to get cancelled. I mean, look at yourself. Look at what you've been through trying to stand up for our next generation.
100%. There are people messaging me all the time saying that they want to speak out, whether these could be concerned employees or concerned parents. They want to speak out, but they're too scared of what will happen to them, and that it will impact their reputation or their livelihood, even that it might alienate their family or their friends. I mean, people are really terrified of this. And, you know, we do live in a world of cancel culture as is propped up by this government. They are pushing full steam ahead with this notion of non-crime hate incidents, which is
just, this is the most stupid waste of police time I've ever known. By its own definition, it's not a crime. It's a complete waste of policing time, and they need to be out there getting knives off kids, stabbing each other.
Correct. And I looked at the sentence passed for the South Horse Cllr, as he's now known, and then I looked at the sentences handed down from last summer for some people who had posted some things on Twitter, and of course they were very different sentences, but they weren't that different. Right?
And the thing, that's one of the questions about cancel culture. People who are scared to stand up and say anything about it, and people who are scared to say what they truly think and their feelings and their freedom of speech, that's because the Labour government is locking you up for your views at the moment. People are getting locked up for saying what they think, and they are getting imprisoned worse than people who are actually committing crimes, killing and murdering people, dealing drugs and knives on our streets are getting off lighter than people for tweets and nasty words. I mean, how are we ever going to beat and break the cancel culture if that's the 1984 situation we live in?
Well, I did some kind of rough calculations, and I worked out that the Southport murderer sentence was only, I think it was 16 times as serious as someone who'd been jailed for something they posted on X, which sounds like a lot on the face of it, but actually, when you've got on one hand an X post and on another multiple innocent children dead, the difference should be thousand-fold, not 16-fold. So, but I agree. And actually, it's quite telling. A number of months ago in the House of Commons, where I believe it was a Labour MP, basically as part of PMQ said that wants to try and bring back some sort of blasphemy law, and he wasn't shut down by Starmer. I know. Which was, Starmer didn't support it, but the fact he didn't shut it down either is also quite telling.
People think things are bad now. Just wait where it's going. Look, my last question I wanted to ask you about was all this anti-whiteness stuff that seemed to be going on, these anti-white incidents that you've discovered. Now, look, you've done a lot of fantastic work studying what's going on, and it's through the British Psychological Society. Now, you put out a tweet, or an X, as we have to call it now, saying very clearly the British Psychological Society is racist against white people. Can you just let our viewers know what's going on there?
Yeah, well, that's the irony. They would term themselves as anti-racist, and I'm saying that is a racist position to take. I did a large expose on the Substack that I write with Matt Goodwin, and essentially they are pushing policies and also training materials on students which can only be described as racist. So just give a few examples of that. hiring people who practice using an anti-whiteness model, referring to whiteness as a mutating disease, telling white colleagues that in the name of anti-racism, they need to be prepared to give up their jobs and salaries to black colleagues, accusing colleagues of quote unquote weaponizing their whiteness with crocodile tears.
It's just ridiculous.
The list goes on.
And that's absolutely ridiculous, because all of us know when you're going for a job or an interview or whatever it is, you get the stupid questions about your diversity and background, which you worry to answer thinking it's going to be used against you. But you're told, no, it's for our studies, it's for us to make sure that we're inclusive and whatever. What you're basically saying is, even if you go and get that job, the minute that you walk in there with a white skin, you are at a disadvantage, because the second someone else needs to come along and tick a box, you're the first they'll look at. That's utterly ridiculous.
Well, it's actually, as long as this is allowed under our legislation, under the Equality Act, you can engage in this country in forms of positive discrimination, as they would call it.
Wow.
Actually, I saw recently that the National Education Union was hiring an equalities lead, which is ridiculous in and of itself. But they stipulated the candidates must be black. I mean,
well, that's racism.
Yeah, well, it's not very equal for an equalities lead position, but yes, the fact that you can solely hire people now based on the skin color is really quite shocking. I mean, so the British Psychological Society and other organisations have looked at, they are pushing a racist narrative. It's
and the guise of affirmative action. That's the point, James. You've got to realise we need to tick some boxes here.
Well, that's why I call them the anti-racist racists. You know, that's precisely what they are, and it's a shame, you know. And I feel sorry for young kids, particularly kind of young white boys, because they're written off as having white privilege when no one knows a damn thing about them. I mean, we know from the studies that have been done now that actually poor working class young white boys who are struggling the most in education, for example, but they'll be written off as having privilege because of the colour of their skin and the fact that they're male. And I think it's a tragedy. And the fact that straight white man is used as a slur these days is also
tells you everything. Well, the question is then, why don't we all just identify as what we want? I mean, remember that famous interview where Piers Morgan identified as a penguin? You know, surely we can all identify as what we want then. If I'm going for a job and I tick the black box, when they then have that interview with me and go, well, hold on, you're not black. I say, oh, excuse me, I can identify as well. But surely that is one of the things that people are going to have to start using the system against itself and playing it at its own game.
Yes, you know what? I think you're right, but the sad fact is that this is a slippery slope. And if you allow self-identification for sex, then where does it lead us to? Are you going to have paedophiles self-identifying as children? Are you going to have non-educated people self-identifying as doctors and pilots and operating on you and flying your aeroplane? I mean, seriously, where does it end? If you can identify as whatever the hell you want, where does the buck stop? But I think we're actually living in very... I mean, I'm a cynic and I'm a depressive by nature anyway, but I think we're living in particularly depressing times, particularly polarized and fractured times. Something's got to change. As I said, I feel very positive and optimistic about the direction America's heading in. I wish we had some of that in this country. We're stuck with this government, unfortunately, for another few years. I think things are going to get worse before they get better.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Look, James, thank you so much for coming on. We'll have to get you on again. Keep doing what you're doing. That was James Esses, who stood up to the woke and won. I'm Matthew Goodwin-Freeman. That was VoteWatch's Deep Dive Discussions. Let us know what you think about the conversations we're having. Thank you very much and have a good night.